Hello everyone, welcome and welcome back. Thank you so much for stopping by. In today's video, we'll be learning how to make this gathered dress. I know there are tons of video on this tutorial, but this is going to be the easiest method. So guys, let's get started. So guys, on the working table, I have my basic block. I've done a tutorial on this. You can go ahead and check it out. And I will simply drop the link. If you're interested, you can check it out. So I will just do a quick sketch without wasting much of your time. So what I'm doing right away is highlighting what each line represents. So you can clearly see the bust line, the under bust line, the waistline, the upper hip line, and that's the hip line down there. Okay, so what I'll simply do now is to trace out this line, because as you can see, it's a little bit faint. So I want to trace it out in such a way that we can see it clearly, okay, to be visible enough for us to see and understand each step while the tutorial is ongoing. Okay, so I will just simply trace out this line quickly, and while I'm tracing out the line, if you don't understand how to draft a basic block, you can just follow the lines and then have an idea of what I'm doing. Okay, so that's the chest line right there, and I'll simply go ahead and link it up this way. Okay, this is the armhole curve. Okay, and I'll just go ahead and highlight the bust line, highlight the under bust, highlight the waistline. You can see the waist dart as well. Okay, so I'll go ahead and also highlight the upper hip line. Okay, I basically included the upper hip line for a particular reason, and while the illustration is ongoing, we'll get to see the reason for it. Okay, so what I'll simply do next is on the bust line, I went out by half an inch and I went upwards above the bust line by 1 inch. This is optional. You don't have to do this. You can actually draft directly from the bust line. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is to link this up. Okay, so on the neckline, I went out by 1 inch. So this is a basic neckline, which is 3 by 3 inches. Okay, so on that line, on the shoulder line, I went out by 3 inches, and I'm going to link it to the 1 inch mark above the bust line. You can simply connect this to the bust line. It depends on the depth of the neckline. Okay, so for me, I want a modest neckline. You can go ahead and draft it, link it beneath the bust line. You can come down below the bust line by 1 inch or link it directly to the bust line. So it depends on what you want, but for me, this is exactly what I want. Okay, so what I'll simply do is to link up that point, the bust line there, to the under bust. Okay, so I want us to be very careful and understand every step of this process, because it will go a long way to help us perfect the process. Okay, so I simply linked this up and definitely extended it towards the side front. Okay, so I will just highlight the line, in as much as there's a line there, but I'll just highlight it so that we can know that there's a new pattern there. Okay, so I'll simply go ahead and cut this out. Okay, so this is the yoke for this illustration. This is clearly the yoke for this illustration. So after cutting it out, we'll proceed to the next step. Okay, so you have to be very careful here so that you don't alter your pattern or you don't alter the illustration. Okay, so guys, on the lower part of the front pattern, what I'll simply do next is to close up this dart, because we can't be drafting the pattern or creating our pattern on with the dart. It's actually a dartless dress. Okay, so what I'll simply do next is to close up the dart before proceeding to the next stage. So I just simply went ahead to straighten up this dart. Okay, know that the waist dart is usually 1 inch, which is half an inch on both sides. So I will just straighten it upwards towards the under bust and downwards towards the hip line. Okay, so what I simply did was to replace these lines on the side except the waistline. Okay, so on the hip line I added 1 inch, and on the under bust I also added 1 inch. The reason for this is so that we don't have any form of shortage. Okay, so I'm striking out this because I know that I've actually closed up this dart, closed up the waist dart. Okay, so you can see that I did not include any measurements on the waistline. simply because the measurement basically for the waist, that is on the waistline, and it narrows down to the hip line and narrows up to the underbust. Okay, so I just replaced 1 inch on the underbust and on the hip line. I simply hope we understand this. Okay, so I'll just open this up for us to see, and then what I'll simply do next is to use my masking tape to close it up, okay, to link up both sides to the center front. Okay, so having done this, I'll just go ahead and straighten up this line, extending it to the other side of the pattern, as you can see me doing. Okay guys, so having done this, what I'll simply do next is to create the triangular waistline, which is from the hip line to the upper hip line. Okay, so it's not a difficult thing to do. So just place your pattern master, or if you have a meter roll, you can go ahead and place it there and then draw a straight line linking the upper hip line to the hip line. So take your measurement and know exactly where you want to place your upper hip line. Okay, so for this hip line, okay, you can decide to extend it downwards, okay, below the hip line. Depends on how long you want your triangular waistline to look like. If you want it to be directly on the hip line, fine. If you want to extend it a little bit downwards, it's still okay. Okay, so it depends on what you want and your available material. Okay, so this is the back pattern, and the difference between the front and the back is simply the zip allowance. So what I'll simply do is to alter the neckline and nothing much, and then retrace the front pattern on the back pattern. So for the neckline, I simply came down by 1.5 inches. Okay, so what I'll simply do next is just retrace my front pattern on the back pattern. Okay, so for accuracy, I suggest you do this. If you're doing a freehand method, you can simply draft your front pattern and place it on a plain fabric. Use it to cut out your back pattern. There's no need redrafting your back pattern so that you don't have any form of alteration, okay, mistakes here and there. So I simply went ahead to mark that on the bust line on the back, because I will still be having the same yoke. I'll be having a yoke, the upper part and the lower part, just like I did for the front pattern. So the actual place where I have my mark, the underbust line on the front pattern, I also went ahead to mark it, create the same line on the back pattern. So I'll simply go ahead and cut this out, and then we have our front and the back pattern. So this is the demarcation. This is the upper section of the back pattern. This is the lower section. You can go ahead to mark it or label it as A and B if you so wish. Okay. So guys, with the yoke for the front pattern, I'll be doing a slash and spread method here, simply because I actually want the bust to sit conveniently in the dress. Okay, so this is optional. You can decide to just, you know, cut out your fabric using this pattern, but if you want a little pleat on the yoke on this particular path, you can go ahead and slash it up just like I'm doing, so that you can pleat it a little bit, and it will be kind of creating an allowance around the bust area. Okay, it won't be too fitted around that side, but if you actually want a fitted one, you can simply make do with the previous pattern. Okay, so having done this, I just slashed it open by a few inches, not more than 1.5 to 2 inches. It depends on how much pleat you want to create, and then I'll simply go ahead to redraft, to trace out the line, and then I'll cut out this pattern. It's nothing so difficult. Okay, just slash it open it up by like 1 or 2 or 3 inches, depending on the amount of pleat you want to create. Like I mentioned earlier, it is not compulsory. You can make do with the previous pattern. The only difference there is that the bust will just be too fitted on that part. Okay, but if you want to create a little allowance with a pleat, there you can do what I'm doing right away. So guys, we're through with the pattern. This is the upper side and this is the lower part of the pattern for the front. Okay, and this is the slash, the little slash we created to enable us create a little gather, a little pleat around the bust area. Okay, so I simply went ahead to use this pattern to cut out on the fabric. This is actually a doll face satin fabric. You can actually make use of a thicker fabric if you have. Okay, so I actually used the lining for it. a doll face satin fabric, and a lining. Okay. Okay. So this is the back pattern. Okay, this is for the back, and then the previous one is for the front. Okay. Okay, this is for the back, and then this is the yoke for the front. Okay, this is the yoke for the front, and this is what we have here. So by the time I create my pleats, you can see the effect that it will create. Okay, so it's looking pretty already even before starting. Okay, so and then the next one is the back, the yoke for the back. Okay, this is the yoke for the back with the same fabric. So the yoke, I have it I'm using the same fabric for the yoke front and back, and then for the lower part of the front and back I'm using a doll face with a lining. Okay, if you have a thicker fabric you can go ahead to use just one fabric without a lining. Okay, so this is what I have, and I'll simply make do with what I have for this tutorial. Okay. Okay, so this is like what we have for the front, the upper part and the lower part. Okay, so guys, what I'll simply do next, I'll simply go ahead and place this right sides facing each other to enable me turn it up. So I'll just close up the sides. Okay, I'll close up the sides on that particular part there. Okay, but this particular point place I just touched, I won't close it up, I'll just stop stitch. Okay, because I'll be attaching a fabric to it, so I'll just stop stitch it. But the other side, the sides, I'll simply close it up. I hope you understand. So I've done that, and this is what we have here. Okay, so I just stop stitch this area and then the triangular waistline. Okay, I turn this side up, and then this is the back. Okay, this is the back pattern for the lower side. Okay, and I turn the sides up, then I left the other parts top stitched the other part where I'll be attaching a fabric. So what I simply did for the front I did for the back. I simply hope that we understand. Okay, so what I'll simply do next, I'll simply go ahead and pleat this in such a way that it would fit in on the dark part, on the satin, on the lower part. Okay, so I'll pleat in such a way that it accommodates what I have on my underbust line on the fabric. So just watch me, I am sure you understand what I'm doing. So I'm pleating in such a way that I'll exhaust the sides. Okay, the side front will suit each other. The side front of the yoke will suit the side front of the lower parts, okay, of the front pattern. So you just continue pleating to exhaust what you have, and then it suits in completely. Okay, so I'll do it for both sides, and then I'll simply take it to my sewing machine, and then I'll run my stitch. So it's best that you pleat first and secure it with a pin so that you know exactly what you're going to stitch. Okay, so guys, having done this, I can now take it to my sewing machine to stitch it. Okay, you can see that it's matching properly. So I'll simply do the same thing for the other side. Okay, so what you simply need to do is to place the yoke right sides on the other fabric, right side facing each other. You take it to the sewing machine and simply run a knit stitch on it to attach the yoke to the other part of the fabric. So just place it this way. Okay, and then run your stitch. Okay, just run your stitch till you get to the upper side, which is the bust line. Okay, and then you flip it up. Okay, so ensure that you relax your seam. So I'll do the same for the back as well. Right sides facing each other, I'll simply go ahead and attach the yoke. We're having excesses on the yoke because I actually closed up, I turned up the satin. I actually turned it up. I turned it up with a lining, so that's why you can see that the yoke seems to be a bit longer, but you can go ahead and trim out any excess by the time you're done joining the upper part to the lower part. Okay, so I'll do this and then I'll bring it back for us to see. So guys, you can see what we have. You can see how pretty it's looking already. I've attached the yoke to the lower part of the front pattern, and I've actually done the same thing for the back as well. So I closed up the neckline with a bias tape. Okay, I close it up with a bias tape. So this is just very simple to do, and I simply hope that we all can make use of a bias tape. But I'll simply show us along the line. For those who don't know how to use a bias tape, I'll still show us how to do this. Okay, so this tutorial is simply for beginners to also understand every step of the process. Okay, so I've actually done this, join the upper part for the back side, and then I use the bias tape to close up the neckline. So guys, I actually left this one, the one part of the back pattern, one part of the back side unattended to, simply because I want to do an illustration on how I achieved this. So I'll just place this my bias tape. This is the bias tape with 1/4 inch on both sides, you know, ironed facing this way. So I will just open it up. Okay, so you open it up and then you use your pin and then attach it on that 1/4 inch line you can see on the bias tape. Make sure you open up the bias tape and then pin it up. Just keep pinning it up till you know, accommodate or you cover up the neckline. Okay, so watch me and I'm sure you understand what I'm doing. So ensure that your pin is placed on the 1/4 inch line on your bias tape. Okay, don't just place it at the center. You see a line there, you know the bias tape is turned on both sides. So open one side, which is about 1/4 inch, just secure it with a pin on your fabric. Okay guys, so we're good here. So guys, I'll simply go ahead and cut off the excess. Okay, so the next thing to do is to turn it against the front. Okay, so I'm going to, when I take this to my sewing machine and I run my stitch, so you can see I've stitched it up. Okay, so I'm going to be turning it against the front. So the next thing to do is to secure it with a pin. So when you turn it to the other side, as you can see me doing, you secure it with a pin, take it to your sewing machine and you stitch it, and then you have a very neat neckline. So guys, because of time, we'll continue the remaining part of this tutorial in my next video, and I promise you it's going to be very detailed and beginner friendly. So guys, kindly give this video a very huge thumbs up if you learned something from it. Okay, it will go ahead to support the growth of the channel. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys. See you in my next video.